Hello everyone, my name is Elite02K and welcome to my unhinged history and political rant. On today's video, we will be talking about the history and events that led to the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war. Let's get into it. World War II, 1945. Hitler pulls a Kurt Cobain, leaves all the Nazi officers to the legal jurisdiction of the Allies. The Emperor of Japan officially surrenders because despite the flag of Japan being a rising sun, they didn't like it when the sun rose directly on top of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Russia, at the same time of the Soviet Union, was being led by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, a communal-socialist government ran by Joseph Stalin until his death in 1953. They decided that they had nothing better to do than play we want arms in space race with the United States instead of, feeding their civilians, causing the Cold War. Now, the Cold War would start in 1947, 2 years after World War II ended, resulting in the communists fighting the capitalists over who had the better economic policy. Spoiler alert, communism sucks and does nothing good besides kill millions of other communists and socialists. The communists being Maoist China and the Soviet Union, Russian Republic, and on the cool kid side, the United States, Canada, and the Western European countries. Now, the Soviets were hella jealous about America's nuclear bomb use during World War II, and if the Soviet Russians enjoyed anything on this earth, it was killing themselves due to literal shittiest economic policies ever invented. Vodka and loud booms. A few German scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project would then flee the United States and go directly to Mother Russia to be just a bunch of snitch-ass pussies, and sell all of the United States nuclear secrets so that the USSR could develop their own nuclear technology. Now, this is the part where I rant and tell you how communism doesn't create anything itself, but it bullies everyone else and steals ideas that communists are too stupid to invent themselves. Yeah. Now, post-Germany World War II, both the Allied nations and Russia would take over influence of Germany and any of its prior occupied countries and territories. This would lead to the Berlin conflict. The Berlin conflict was the separation of Germany into East and West along with Berlin. Communism controlling the East, capitalism on the West. Yeah. The Allies would then form what is known as today as NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in order to prevent anything like World War II from happening again. The Soviets didn't enjoy having all the cool kids at one table with them, being uninvited themselves, and created the Warsaw Pact in 1955, which had similar relation to NATO, but with the Eastern countries that were partaking in the shittiest economic governance policies of all time, communism. Now, the Koreans were being influenced by communism. This resulted in a civil war in Korea between the communist North and the capitalist or free market South. Thus kicks off the Korean War in 1950. The United States supporting, financing, and actively fighting alongside South Korea, and the Soviets in China doing the same for the North, but not actually fighting with them because communists don't like to get their hands dirty when it involves the potential of their enemies killing them instead of their government do it. This war would end in the separation of North and South Korea in 1953. Due to the fact that neither side was able to completely beat the other without serious further world conflict involving the Soviets and the Allies. People would flee East Berlin for West Berlin. The communists don't particularly enjoy freedom of travel, and thus they would erect the Berlin Wall in 1961 to prevent the departure of their slave force. I'm sorry, I meant citizenship. But many attempts would be successfully made to escape into West Berlin, and the Soviets consistently found out about these attempts and would go into improve all of the measures to prevent escape to West Germany. It's kind of like when you want to break up with your toxic significant other and they threaten to stab you if you leave them because they are worthless human beings who depend on you to live their pathetic, sad excuse for economic policies, lives. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis happens, where the Soviets were actively making friends with and sending suspected nuclear payload supplies to Cuba's dictator, Fidel Castro, Justin Trudeau's daddy, probably, and the United States actively putting missile silos in NATO-controlled territories such as Italy and Turkey, kind of close to Soviet borders. An agreement was eventually had between the then U.S. President John F. Kennedy and then Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. The Soviets would dismantle any offensive weapons offered and delivered to Cuba in exchange for the U.S. public declaration and agreement not to attack or invade Cuba again. But behind closed doors, Kennedy also agreed to disarm any weapons it deployed to Turkey. This agreement would also lead to the Moscow-Washington hotline being set up to connect a direct communication line from the White House to Moscow to help prevent any future misunderstandings. Now, I'm going to skip a lot of shit because, as it turns out, if you dig deep enough, a lot of the wars fought in the Middle East and Asia, like the Soviet-Afghan wars and the Vietnam War, was almost directly caused by the Cold War. America was fighting off communist influence. The Soviets were playing baby daddy and dropping that child support communist seed everywhere they fucking could. It's just a gigantic mess. Now we go back to Berlin. People in East Berlin were actively being starved from lack of resources from the Soviet Union on the east, so the Americans and British decided to send in airdrops of supplies to relieve the malnutrition of the citizens there. This would escalate until Western influence was the only thing keeping the East Germans alive. The Soviets had pretty much the entire world's eye on them, watching them actively try and stop supply drops from the West to come in, pretty much allowing the citizens of East Germany to live. And there began a revolt of the Russian people with how their government was handling pretty much everything ever, because communism sucks. Next, we have the Soviet Union would remove the Iron Curtain after the revolution of 1989, and the Soviet Union would dissolve completely following the 1991 coup attempt. The Russian Federation became the Soviet Union's leadership state, while other Soviet-controlled areas would take opportunity to succeed completely and create their own countries. In July of 1990, the territory of Ukraine would adopt the Declaration of State Sovereignty of Ukraine and found its own government. Ukraine would move from the communist economy to more free market capitalist economy, releasing restrictions on its farmers and industrial workers, obviously making people happier. Side note, in case you haven't noticed in the last bit, Ukraine was indeed part of a Russian territory for a lot of history. However, it's declared its own independence away from any type of Russian-led state, so get fucked. Now, if we fast forward to 2001, Russia's elected leader and previous KGB officer, Vladimir Putin, decides to meet up with then U.S. President George W. Bush. It's suspected by many government officials that Putin asked Bush if he could put in a recommendation request for NATO for Russia. Bush agrees to it initially. Over the next few days, it's suspected that Bush was advised by other government officials that they should not agree to the request, but calls Putin saying that they aren't able to add Russia to the NATO allied countries roster. And as we go further into the future, over the next few years, we'd see other countries closer to Russia's border join NATO. This would be Lithuania, Latvia, Bulgaria, Estonia, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia in 2004, and then in 2009, Albania and Croatia would join. and then finally Montenegro in 2017. Donald Trump is then elected president in 2016 of the United States. One of Trump's very first things that he did, Trump decides to meet with Putin about bringing closer relations to the states in Russia. Putin tells Trump that there's no real problems, but he'd prefer if no members of NATO were added alongside the Russian border due to obvious concerns of safety of both Russia and its citizens. Trump obviously agrees to this notion. He doesn't really talk about it specifically, but this is essentially what happened. Furious at the agreement, a lot of United States Democratic Party members began attacking Trump, calling him a Russian asset, say that his presidency was influenced by the Russians to get him elected, all of which has never been proven besides the meeting, which we just spoke about. Everything else has been debunked. Donald Trump loses the 2020 election to now 46th President Joe Biden, and almost immediately talks begin with NATO involving introducing Ukraine as its newest member. Now, I'm going to try to be completely unbiased here, say that Canada actively agreed to allow China or Russia to build military bases and missile stores within 100 miles of the border of the United States. Almost all politicians in the U.S., left, right, center, would be having an unhinged mental breakdown. It would be nonstop news headlines. Russia, 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 Russia. China, 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 China. Whoever it is. I'm not saying Russia is perfect, or even saying that Putin is even a shard of a decent human being. All I'm saying is that in 2021, the United States just spent the most amount of money in history getting through the pandemic. We have rampant inflation. We have the government spending an unhinged amount of money on transgender studies, social economics programs, and other stupid fucking things instead of fixing roads and making things cheaper here. You know, the money printer now identifies as a nuclear-grade, fully automatic tactical assault money printer. If I was Putin, I wouldn't want to directly go to war with America. Fuck around and find out. So instead, what I would do is invade a country the United States is actively allied. Ukraine was a perfect opportunity. Putin didn't want it a part of NATO, the whole shebang. Force them to spend billions and billions of dollars funding a war against me, causing inflation further, causing shortages further, disruptions in shipping and supply all over the world in order to batter the American citizens out of voting for a bunch of warmongers whose only real goal it is to enrich themselves and their friends with private military contractors and weapon supplier money. That's all it is. That is the history of Russia, Ukraine, the Cold War, and all events leading to the current conflicts we are staring at. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will donate you one of my kidneys and my right testicle. No, you can't have the left one. That's my favorite. His name's Ernie. P.S. Communism fucking sucks. Have a good night.